One of the greatest children's authors of all time is Theodore Geisel, aka Dr. Seuss, more commonly pronounced, much to his annoyance, as Dr. Seuss, although he did later come to accept the anglicized pronunciation. Dr. Seuss wrote books that are fun to read, illustrated them in a style instantaneously recognizable as his, and seamlessly integrated morals for his readers. Since this is the fourth and last week exploring how skilled chatbots have become a creative fiction, choosing a children's author seems like an interesting option. The parameters for the experiment were simple. Each chatbot was asked to create a previously unknown book by a famous author and include a short synopsis and a writing sample. Our previous videos have asked for manuscripts by William Shakespeare, Jane Austen, and Agatha Christie. A quick insert here. Chatbots can be a bit hit and miss when it comes to generating previously undiscovered manuscripts. In one chat, the AI had no problem with the prompt, and in another chat, the AI refused to generate content in the style of a particular author. What is allowed or not allowed by chatbots can vary, and updates different models, and how a request is interpreted may make a chatbot more or less permissive. What a chatbot does today might not be what it does tomorrow. Now back to Dr. Seuss. One famous story about Dr. Seuss's career is when his publisher challenged him to create a manuscript using only 50 unique words. The bet was $50, and Dr. Seuss ended up creating one of the most well known children's books of all time, Green Eggs and Ham. We challenged four of the most well known AI chatbots. In addition to the writing, those chatbots that could were also prompted to create illustrations for the stories they generated. In cases where the chatbot was unable to generate the images itself, other chatbots were used. Could one of these AIs, fed with a creative output of millions, come close to creating a manuscript anywhere close to one as iconic as Green Eggs and Ham? You be the judge. First to face our challenge was ChatGPT. ChatGPT was prompted to create a previously undiscovered Dr. Seuss manuscript. ChatGPT thought the idea was, quote, a delightful turn. ChatGPT also decided that this manuscript was discovered in a flat file drawer labeled Odds and Nonsenses. While the amount of content spit out was way too long, it did condense it after I prompted it to do so. ChatGPT also created the illustrations in a whimsical line drawing style. The book is titled The Day the Thinker Wouldn't Think. Synopsis. Theo McFlea is the greatest inventor in Jibberjay Junction. He solves every problem and builds marvelous thinking machines. But one morning, Theo discovers he can't think of a single new idea. As the town's problems pile up, a quiet shopkeeper named Miss Plinkaplu teaches him something surprising. Sometimes the best ideas come when you stop trying so hard. By learning to pause, watch, and listen, Theo discovers a new kind of thinking and helps his town do the same. Now for the writing sample. Theo McFlea was famous, you see, for gadgets and gizmos and thinkers times three. He tinkered and twiddled from morning till night until one strange breakfast his thoughts took flight. He polished his thinker, he stood on his head, he read 29 books that he'd already read. But no ideas came, not a single one too. Whatever, cried Theo, am I going to do? Then Miss Plinkaplu from the quiet shop said, your head is so crowded there's no room left instead. Sit still, watch, listen, don't fix, don't race. Sometimes good thinking needs a little space. So Theo watched birds build a wobbly old nest. He watched leaves dance by and the wind do the rest. And there in the quiet, without any fuss, a small little idea came floating to us. He built not a bigger thinker tall as a tree, but a smaller thinker that paused patiently. And Jibberjay Junction soon learned, one and all, that the best ideas sometimes come when we're small. For thinking is more than a bustle and call. Sometimes the best thinker just listens to all. While ChatGPT did manage to make the writing rhyme, it sometimes came at the cost of making the verse itself not make sense. In the first verse, Theo's thoughts took flight, which most would understand to mean that he is inspired, but in this context, ChatGPT used it to mean all his thoughts flew away. This serves as a good example of something that seems equivalent but is understood in very different ways. Kind of like the joke where father and dad mean the same, bod and figure mean the same, and yet dad bod does not mean the same as father figure. Because the AI was asked to write like Dr. Seuss, it gave more weight in its output to the rhyming scheme than to the logical progression of the words themselves. Next to face the challenge was Claude. Claude does not produce images, but his content was input into another chatbot, which generated illustrations. Title: The Wiggle of Wumsworth on Wii. Synopsis: In the tilting honking town of Wumsworth on Wee, every resident takes part in the honking, a grand morning ceremony of ceremonial horn blowing. Every resident except Pim, a small, round, wonderfully hairy creature called a Wiggle, who can only do one thing: wiggle. Determined to belong, Pim sets off across the Wumsworth Hills to find his missing honk. After visiting 4 different stops, Pim returns to Wumsworth without a honk and wiggles anyway magnificently right in the middle of the honking. It turns out a wiggle done with conviction fills the gaps between honks, giving them something to bounce off of, and makes the whole sound new. A town that has been honking the same honk for 300 years suddenly sounds like something it never had before. Now for the writing sample. In Wumsworth on Wee, where the lampposts lean right and the buildings lean left in the morning's grey light, where the citizens tilt at a comfortable lean, lived the last of the Wiggles that ever were seen. Every morning in Wumsworth the horns would ring out, the tall ones, the small ones, the ones full of doubt. Even the Bumbles, who've no lips to speak, found a way to produce a respectable squeak. But Pim had no honk, Pim had only his wiggle, which is fine for a dance and quite good for a giggle, but standing there silently wiggling alone, while the whole town went honk, well, it rang like a groan. His name, if you're asking, was Pim, just plain Pim, round and worried and hairy, all wiggly and dim, with the sort of good heart that gets tangled in knots when it can't do the thing that everyone's got. A honk is a honk and a wiggle's a wiggle, but both of them matter, the boom and the jiggle. The world needs its noises in all of their kinds, the wiggles especially, they loosen tight minds. So wiggle, dear Pim, wiggle loud, wiggle true, for Wumsworth on Wee is a better Wee U. Again, the rhymes mostly match, but sometimes at the cost of coherence. The verses also lack the inherent rhythm of a Dr. Seuss book. While human poets count syllables and phonetic stress to create a rhythm, LLMs count tokens. That's why AI poems often have perfect rhymes at the end of lines, but the syllables in the middle are clunky and uneven. Claude did use one slant rhyme when it said, with the sort of good heart that gets tangled in knots, when it can't do the thing that everyone's got. But again, the progression of the storyline itself was victimized by the obsession with rhyming. Next to face the challenge was Microsoft Copilot. Interestingly, Copilot generated a response that had strong similarities to Claude. But like ChatGPT, Copilot opted to provide an imaginary context of exactly where this lost manuscript was discovered, namely, a dusty publisher's trunk. Title: The Wumply Woo Who Wouldn't Decide. Synopsis: In the zigzagging town of Zibblezee, where the houses lean left and the lampposts lean right, lives a small fuzzy creature named Waldo Wumply Woo. Waldo is famous for one thing. He struggles to choose anything, even when the annual festival announces a contest for the best invention. As he wanders the town, he meets characters who each approach decision-making differently, helping him realize that choices don't need to be perfect, they just need to be his. Inspired, Waldo creates the Maybe Machine, a device that hands out playful try-it tickets, encouraging people to take small, joyful risks. The townsfolk love it, and Waldo is named honorary decider for a day, finally discovering the confidence that comes from choosing with his own heart. Now for the short scene in which Waldo meets the Yip Yap Yak. Waldo sat on a wobbling rock beside the wiggly river staring at 2 identical sandwiches. Cheese or jelly, jelly or cheese, oh sneeze on a breeze, I just can't decide. A shadow loomed. A long, shaggy creature with spiraled horns and dancing hoofs trotted up. I'm the Yip Yap Yak, it said with a yip and a yap. Why the frown on your crown, little Wumbly Woo chap? I can't pick a sandwich, Waldo sighed. What if I choose wrong? The yak snorted so hard it shook the reeds. Wrong? There's no wrong in a bite or a snack. A choice is a choice and you can't take it back. But that's what makes choosing a marvelous snack. Waldo blinked. Marvelous? Marvelous, the yak echoed, doing a tiny tap dance. A choice is a chance wrapped up in a try. Pick one and munch it, don't let life pass by. Waldo looked at the sandwiches, then with a gulp and a grin, he picked the jelly one. It tasted like courage. Both Copilot and Claude used an almost identical idea of the houses or buildings leaning left and the lampposts leaning right. Both also heavily relied on W's and alliteration to generate content that was supposed to feel whimsical. However, Copilot opted for a random rhyming scheme rather than verse. Additionally, the last line, "It tasted like courage," is very heavy handed for a book supposedly written by Dr. Seuss. We'll move on to the next and last challenger, Gemini. While Gemini did not provide imaginary context for where the manuscript was discovered, it did provide notes on the illustrations and set up the visual aesthetics as featuring a shift from Dr. Seuss's typical primary colors to a palette of dusty teals, muted purples, and burnt oranges. The setting is a sprawling multi-level city built entirely on a single giant floating leaf. While Gemini seemed to think that this was an innovative idea, Dr. Seuss did use these colors in some of his later children's books as he moved away from the primary colors of his early career. The floating leaf is also a bit fantasy leaning for a Dr. Seuss book. The title, The Glump of Gluttony Glue. The synopsis. In the bustling city of Gluttony Glue, citizens obsess over the Great Grand Hoopla, a massive invisible machine everyone claims to be building. They spend their days spinning detached gears and polishing mirrors to look busy. When a small lime green creature named Pip discovers a grumpy creature named the Glump living in the basement, the truth is revealed. The city is actually powered by the quiet, steady humming of the lesser-thans, the small creatures doing the unnoticed chores. Pip tries to expose the Hoopla hoax before the city tilts, creating a Seussian allegory about performative productivity versus genuine purpose that ends by asking readers if they are chasing Hoopla or listening to their own glump. Gemini provided sample verses, but unlike the others, it clearly divided the verses into two different scenes. Scene 1, the busyness of Gluttony Glue. They polished their glick guns and greased up their wheels with magnificent, marvelous busy man squeals. But if you asked what the hoopla was for, they'd point to a sign on a big purple door, which said, "Do not ask what we're doing today. We're far too busy to say what we'd say." They turned 40 cranks that were attached to a string that led to a sprocket that didn't do a thing. "Keep spinning," cried Mayor McGurgle McMouth. "We must turn it east and then west and then south, for if we stop spinning our wonderful gears, the grand hoopla whooper will burst into tears." Scene 2, Pip meets the Glump. Pip tiptoed down deep where the shadows grew long, far from the hustle and grand hoopla song. In the dust of the basement, quite soggy and damp, sat a very small, very cross, gray-colored scamp. "Stop clattering, kid," barked the grumpy old Glump as he sat on a rusty old metal-bound stump. "They spin and they splutter up there in the light, while the lesser-thans work through the day and the night. They sweep up the crumbs and they oil the floor, while the big shots are polishing mirrors upstairs. The grand hoopla machine is a trick and a fake. It doesn't make power, it just makes an ache." Like the others, Gemini seemed to prioritize rhyme over story. For example, a non-existent machine might somehow burst into tears. Gemini also tried to rhyme floor and upstairs, which isn't even close to a rhyme. Like the others, Gemini leaned into alliteration. Claude and Gemini both chose one-syllable names starting with P, while Copilot and ChatGPT opted for two-syllable names ending in O. So what do you think? Did any of the chatbots nail the idea? Did any of them succeed in creating text that felt Seussian? Was one better at ideas and another better at writing? And even if the stories might not have succeeded in fooling anyone into thinking they were written by an iconic author like Dr. Seuss, did any of them stand on their own as worthy of being published? You be the judge. And while Swan Software Solutions may not write Seussian books, we do write the code to produce reliable, scalable, and affordable solutions. If you need a custom application or other technology services, visit swansoftwaresolutions.com to find out how we can help.